Hello and welcome to another Retro Crazy. I think you can guess what this is, the Atari 400, which was introduced in 1979. These were made right up till 1992 in various guises, which is phenomenal. When this was released, this was a whopping $550 or $1,000 if you wanted the 800. Built on the MOS 6805 CPU, they were the first home computers designed with custom coprocessor chips as well. This allows for better graphics and sound than their counterparts, and they were fairly unique in this, up till about the release of the Commodore 64. The 400 had 8K of RAM, a cartridge port on the top, which I'm glad to say still works, and a spill-proof keyboard membrane. Very handy. The 800 had a proper keyboard, it had a second cartridge slot, because this was shuffled over and you had a left and a right one. And it did have internal slots to allow you to be able to upgrade it to 48K internally. It's estimated that from release until their update to the Axial range in 1983, that over 2 million units were produced. So yeah, that's a good few, This one has seen better days. This is the condition I got it in. It was sold, I bought it via eBay, untested. I have no idea if this works, there's no power supply. It came with a whole bunch of cartridges. It also came with boxed paddle controllers. I even got the manuals, and the one thing that it didn't come with, unfortunately, was a power supply. Let's get this stripped down and let's have a look at getting this a bit cleaner and see what's inside. With that apart, we can see that we've got a main circuit board with a power board and the RF out. That one has a massive RF cable that actually goes from there to the front and then out the back, and then a huge cable on the back. It's ridiculous. I was having trouble with this. Turns out that while it is a tight fit, it's just a sprung contact, and that would have made lifting this board off so much easier. So, lesson learned there. And then I've got the rest of this to clean up and sort out, which we'll do separately. So I'm going to start. Where do I start? Well, I think the first thing I should be doing is cleaning out some of this. This will actually come off separately. And I do have some capacitors. And on the back we have 2 daughter boards. Now this is marked 16K, so I'm going to guess that this is a 16K board, because that's what the slots were for. I was adding on memory. So this might be a slightly later model. Revision A1. I don't see a date on it yet. So there's a 16K board. And this one. and this one is the processor board. This is what made it so expensive to produce, because you've effectively got 4 main boards and a second subboard assembly here for the RF modulator. 2 screws, and again that will lift off. So I'm going to pop these to the side. We'll give these contacts a clean. They are a little bit grubby on both boards. I don't see any capacitors worth worrying about on these though. That's fine. So we're going to concentrate on these 2 boards. There is a single capacitor down here, and then the power supply has multiple, including 7805 and a 7812, I believe. So they'll need replaced, just as a matter of course. So let me go and have a look and see what caps I have. Well, that was lucky. This leg, which holds this standoff, the screw has dropped out, and it left the single washer sat on the circuit board. If that had been powered up and gone anywhere on the power supply, that could have been good night to this power supply. However, I did not find the missing screw, so wherever that's gone, hopefully it didn't cause any damage. So I've got everything I need bar 1 capacitor, so I'll need to order that up. But let's crack on and do what we can. Other than the missing capacitor, which I'll need to order up, everything else is ready to go, but I haven't soldered on this cap yet. Interestingly, this one comes with 3 legs, and this one's marked as NC no connection, so it looks like it's been done for stability. However, there is contamination on the bottom of the cap, and we can see contamination on the circuit board. This cap might have started to leak. So the first thing I'm going to do is get some isopropyl alcohol and clean all this up to ensure that any corrosion doesn't go any further. I think I've been quite lucky. It doesn't look like there's been much contamination at all, so that hopefully will be good to go now. So let's finish off by fitting that last cap. So that leaves a final couple of things to look at, and as you can see, we've got corrosion, mostly tarnished on the power socket, and I do have a rocker switch here. However, I won't be able to get into the rocker switch without, I think, damaging it. So what I am going to do is I'm going to measure and make sure it's making connection. very, very, very dusty, and I'm going to have to clean this as well. Now this should just pop out. Like so. And I can take this away for a good clean. I've just got to make sure that I know exactly how it goes back in. In fact, it can only go in one way, it's specifically keyed. So, pop that to the side, because on this, we've got a single cap to replace here. Now, while I form the legs on this cap, I want to point out that the circuit board itself is quite nicely marked, because even on the underside and on the power board, they do mark either the positive or the negative where they can. So it's quite nicely set up. And again, there's a positive on the top. Just down here. So my way of forming these, I've got my negative mark with the arrow pointed towards my finger. I'll sit it roughly where I would like it, grab it, and then trying to keep, if I can, both the marking and that visible. I can there, there's a marking that side and the cap size, and then just bend it down. I'll take that, pop it on the board, grab it roughly where it has to be done, rotate it, and then bend that leg to match. The reason I do this is if I ever need to recap in the future, or somebody else does, you can see exactly what the caps are, you can see the markings, there's none of this having to take it off to check, as there is with a number of machines at manufacture. So now I can flip this over and just quickly solder it. Now if I let this go, that one's going to stay, but a lot of the time they can just drops through, which it kind of is. Pull it into place, bend one of the legs out slightly, and that'll hold it a bit better. However, that's not all the story. I'm going to do this section without the solder sucker on, so you can hear what I'm saying. I'm going to push the solder down, and I'm going to pause. Now I can get the cap on the other side and push it up into place as I heat. So it's now sitting flat on the board. Now I can straighten this leg, and I straighten the legs because if you ever need to replace the caps for any reason, they'll drop straight through rather than being bent at that angle and then having to heat them and bend them, as I've had to do to get most of them off of this board. This final one, again, I'm just going to make sure it's sitting straight, heat, add some solder, and then I drag the iron up. I don't know if you've noticed that. And what that does for me is any excess goes onto the leg rather than pulling away and you ending up with a lump. So when you snip it, you're cutting off any excess as well, and you're left with a much, much nicer finish. So let me show you. And they're really, really nicely finished. Now, a lot of people use flux. I've got a number of different fluxes. I've got this one which I use, which is okay. I've seen a lot of channels using different ones. Chip Quick being one that Gadget UK uses. And Yeah, that one's okay, but it leaves a very sticky residue. But you can see I've added 0 flux, and I've actually got quite a bit of flux showing, and that's because this is a very, very old solder. This is in excess of, what, 30 years old, and it's got a good flux content, and of course that lovely lead content that we all love. So now I'll give this a quick clean, and hopefully, other than cleaning up some contact points, that's pretty much it for the main board. Now that that's all cleaned and done, and that these are all done, I'm going to put a little bit of deoxit on them and just pop them in. They should be absolutely fine because they've probably never been out in their life. So that's what came out of the cartridge slot. Hopefully it's a bit cleaner now though, and will work. Now it's time to have a look at the plastics. So I'm quickly going to strip all these off, and then it's through for a bit of a clean. And again, I'll be using hot soapy water with some Oxy Vanish. So I've taken this as far as it can go, and it doesn't come out that way. So it looks like they've actually fed that end through, which is much narrower. However, I have a ferrite ring here, and I really don't want to go stressing that. So I'm going to have to clean this with all this in situ and try and keep it out of the water. That'll be fun. Well, that's like night and day. Okay, this isn't attached, but it's so much cleaner. I did get a brief 3 hours of some lovely sunshine, so it was also outside doing some sun brighting, and it's come up not bad at all. Now, I did find a crack in the case, so I have super glued that. That's now stronger than it was. So let's look at reassembly. Now that I've had the delivery and fitted the final cap, we can put this board down for testing. I have a brand new power supply, which is 9 volts AC for this. I'm going to place one negative lead on the negative lead of this cap, and now I should be able to probe and test. So hopefully I should find, as per the markings on the board, minus 5 volts, 5 volts A and B, one I think's for video circuit and the other one's for the main chips, ground, and plus 12 volts. So let's see what we get. LED doesn't come on because remember these have a secondary switch on the ROM cartridge port. And now if I drop it down, I see the LED operates. So that's a good sign. So let's do some probing for voltages.
I've paused the video here because I made a huge fundamental mistake. If you can spot it, well done. If not, and you want to see exactly what happened, head to the end of the video because it'll be on after the credits and I'll put the entire thing there.
It's now been 2.5 weeks and a holiday since I last looked at this, and that gave me a lot of time to check things out and to think about what was going on. I am so used to working with AC that of course DC being rectified on a board, I was being an idiot. I was taking my ground plane from the AC input, which is throwing every reading off. Of course it's going to. I've actually got to take my reading from either leg on the CR 207 or 209 diodes, the bridge rectifier, negative. But after a little bit of checking and a lot of help between Exos forums and Atari Age forums, I did some questions, I got a lot of answers, and it got me thinking. That's when I realised I was on the wrong ground plane. But a key bit of information was given to me regarding why my 5-volt voltages were so out. And that's because there was no load. I had suspected it, but it was confirmed. We have a 2-watt resistor here, which I believe goes 2 watt through, excuse me, 33 ohm, and what that does is it goes between 5-volt rails and it acts as an extra boost for current if the system needs it, more than the power regulator can provide. However, if there's no load, then you end up with a lot of the power going directly through this, boosting the voltages up, which is what I saw. You'll actually find that the voltages when read are almost about 13 volts, if not 14, with no load. And that's because effectively the power you're sending to the power regulator input is being matched on the output through the system. So it needs the load. So let's power this on and let's do some testing now and just confirm that everything is fine. So apologies, I'm going to try and do this left-handed because I've got to operate the switch. So power's on, minus 5 volts, exactly what it should be. There's your 12 volts. Ground is exactly ground, which is what you would expect. And now we've got a rock solid 4.98 volts across 5A and 5B, if I could keep the probe in place left-handed. There we go. So to test the 5 volts, what I've had to do is introduce an artificial load. And all this is, if I take this off, you'll see it's on the DC ground plane, just tucked in at CR207. And this is a 10 ohm resistor, 10 watts, but a 10 ohm resistor, one leg, in one of either 5A or 5B, it doesn't matter, and the other one tied to ground. That gives it its load, and now we can test it fine. So we can see that all the work that's been done on the power board is now finished, and we can look at reassembly.
Well, that's all we've got time for in part 1. Join me in a couple of weeks' time when we look at part 2, which will include the 410 program recorder, and see if this works. Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and see you in the next Retro Crazy.
5 volts. Ooh, minus 12, not good. 5 volts, 6.75, yeah, not good. Ground is, oh, minus 7 volts, and the 12 volts is 5 volts. Okay, so we've got a problem. I'm going to switch off. Glad I did this without plugging it into the main board. That could have been very unfortunate. Now with the minus 12 volts on the minus 5 volts and only 5 volts on the 12 volts, I am wondering if there is an issue with the 7812. So I'm going to go back and double check. I'll fit the old one, see if we get a different result. That'll tell me that it's definitely that one. So back in a second. So I've done some digging and I popped out a request on Exos forum. I'll put the link in the description. I do have to say the guys there, superb. I got answers pretty quickly from 2 different sources, and I am really impressed by just how professional the guys were. So if you get stuck, I would advise giving the Exos forum a shout for anything Atari. Now, 2 different sources. One of them pointed me towards CR201, which is a 5.1 volt Zener, and what that does is it drops the voltage down, I believe on the negative towards ground by 5 volts. So to that end, I've got some replacements. Now, I did find on the user manual that it suggested if you don't get minus 12 volts here, to replace CR206 to 209, which are 1N5391 diodes. That's the bridge rectifier, taking the AC and converting it to DC. But interestingly, I'm getting DC, so I'm not sure that I'm going to be looking at these as a fault. So first of all, I'm going to try replacing this CR201 diode, see what happens. It does also suggest replacing CR202 and 203, but I'll need to check and see just exactly what they are. Now, this is exactly why I solder the way I do. This diode has been put in and the legs have been bent, which means I can desolder them, but then I've got to try and straighten the legs to be able to pull them out. You'll have noted when I solder, I tend to try and bend the legs so they're vertical, which means if I ever come to replace anything, it should be a lot simpler. But I'm going to have to heat these, straighten the legs, before I can pull this out. I do have to say, the nice thing with the Atari boards is the markings. They've got a nice thick end showing where your band should be, and on the underside of the board, hopefully you can see that, there's actually the diode symbol and the direction that they should be fitted, as well as obviously having the negative symbol for the capacitors. So really, really nicely marked. I can see more diodes under here. So yeah, I'm quite impressed with the way Atari marked their boards. So here we are at the bench once more for testing. Let's make sure everything still powers on. LED comes on. So let's test this rail. Still showing 12 volts. Still minus 7.5 volts on ground. I'm still not sure. Okay, I just want to check. I'm getting 7 volts out here. and it's fairly stable, and it's DC. So I am not sure. It's certainly like the voltage regulator, the 7805, that's directly on the output, it is high. I'm wondering if I should replace this with a trackle power, just to see if the trackle power gives a more stable output. And difficult to see, but the 12 volts, that's 22 volts in, with only that out. I don't think I could have not just a faulty original set, but a pair of faulty LM series on the output. That would just be a bit much. I can try another set of LMs. I do have another set. I'm wondering first of all if I should try putting in the trackle power and see what that gives me. I've got the trackle power soldered into place, but I've done it very loosely. There's not a lot of solder, it's enough to hold it in for testing. So let's see what happens this time. So let's check the 5 volt rails. Yeah, they're not right at all. So following the Atari 400 schematic and troubleshooting, I've now replaced CR202 and CR203, which are the 1N5391 diodes. So same diodes. Let's see what happens. So we've still got the odd power readings. I am back to an LM7805 on the side. Now there is a possibility that it needs a load to give the right voltage readings, but I'm loath to put -5 volts. But I'm loath to put -12 volts through the system, and that, even with a load, that should show more than the 4 volts it's normally giving. Obviously it's reading wrong because I've not currently got it powered on. So I'm going to continue having a look and see, but I can replace them anyway because I don't think it's these.